welcome back to At Home with Cathy. Today we're going to do another project from our wonderful little book on paint transformations from Annie Sloan. This one is following up the previous show. We painted an oak hall table or plant stand. This is an oak chair that we have no idea the history of it. This is one that we found by the side of the road with a very disgusting cushion on it that we trashed. But the chair was just too good looking, even though it has some nicks and marks and it looks like maybe somebody gouged something out of the arm over here. It had a lot of character, and I thought, oh, everything, like I think, is, oh, a painting project. So I thought what we would do is try this look, the limed look oak chair. I need an oak piece to do this because you need the depth of grain that you get with oak, and I thought this is perfect. It's a project that'll take a little bit longer, so we're going to get started right away. We're going to do it in old white, and it is very simple. It's old white, water, and some wax at the end. Now, I know you're supposed to use a paint can opener, but I have these little spatulas because I need them when I'm cleaning out paint when I'm mixing it, and I need to be able to clean it all out. But what I've discovered is it works beautifully as a can opener. So I feel like I sort of have a 2-for-1 now. And the reason I opened this can is when you open a fresh can, or you open a can you haven't used for a while, it's got a really watery kind of surface. You do need to stir your old whites, all of your paints. Some colors you can see it right away because you can see the pigment that maybe was used to make a blue has risen to the top a little bit. With your paler colors, your old white, your pure white, some of the other ones, you don't really notice it as much. What you do notice is it's kind of got a liquidy top on it. Like any paint, all the heavy pigments settle to the bottom, and you need to give it a good stir. You want it to see it nice and even all throughout. And it should just kind of drip off your stir stick just a little bit. So that's it. There, I'll move these out of the way. And with this, it's an all-over paint. I want a good coat on all of this. I want to make sure it's worked right into the grain. Now, in the book, Annie is working with a chair that she had dipped, or the varnish taken off, so it was down to the raw wood. I didn't do that. What I did was I used mineral spirits to take off the shine. I used steel wool. I washed the piece all down. I used steel wool, and I took off the shine for this piece so that hopefully my paint will stick to it the way it maybe not quite as well as it does on hers, but the idea being the same, that I'd get the paint right in to the grooves. I know why they do that, because once you've taken the varnish off, the wood becomes thirstier and you'll see more of the paint going right into the green. So it's a good solid coat all over this. And once we have that coat on there, we're going to let this dry. Not cure, just dry. And the difference between drying and curing is dry to the touch. So if I come back up and look at this piece, I'm not going to get any paint on me when I touch it. Curing is like any paint. Curing is waiting for all of the moisture in the paint to evaporate, which happens only over a period of time. And when that's happened, my paint is considered to be cured, and it's much tougher, and it'll take more use. You see it on wall paint all the time. Don't wash this paint for 30 days, and that has to do with it being cured and tougher. So I'm doing the inside here, just down. I don't need to do where the blocks are, because that's going to be where the new non-smelly cushion goes. I'm just going to work my way around here. It's always the trick, knowing where your paint can is so you don't knock it over. So this is going to take a little while. We're going to have to just go along and do each piece. And in a chair, I usually start with the chair upside down, but a rocking chair is a little bit trickier, so we're not going to do that. We're just going to work with it sitting right side up on my handy dandy turntable. So we're just finishing up the last of the old white on this oak chair, and it's kind of interesting. Even as I go around painting in the winter, your house is always drier, so paint dries faster, and I'm seeing it dry. Even as I finish painting one side, I can see it drying on the other side. And what I'm noticing is how much the paint is soaking into this oak. I can see spots where it's soaked in and left paint on the surface, and where it hasn't soaked in hardly at all, and it's left a whole lot of paint. So what I'm going to do is just spin the chair around a little bit, make sure that I had really good coverage here. It's very easy when you're painting a chair to miss a rung or a small section underneath, like right here. I did paint under the arms because in a rocking chair, when you rock back, you might see a little bit under the arms of the chair. I'm also looking for drips. When you have things like this little cutout, there's often a drip, so I'm double checking that. I'm checking to make sure I get the insides there. I'm just going to spin it around and have a quick look for drips, make sure I didn't miss anything. Then I'm going to let it dry. It needs to dry to a pretty good, so that there's nothing wet left on it at all. So we're going to put the brush down and we're going to put this chair to dry, and then we're going to come back and start what the liming process is. So we're back to our lime looked oak chair, and this is the first time I've done this. So what's interesting is my old white has dried on this chair, and we're going to get a close-up here, but you actually can see where brown is coming through just a little bit, like there's a shadow of it here. The side of the chair, the side rail is quite brown. That's the varnish, or what's left of it, because I did strip some of it off, and it's reacting with the paint. It's a chemical reaction, and you're getting a little bit of this brown coming through. If this were a piece where this was my final finish, that might kind of bother me. So what I would have to do is shellac the whole thing to stop that varnish from coming through, that oil from the varnish or whatever that they use, probably a varnish, coming through and turning my paler paints kind of a brown color. And what it would show through on a darker paint, like if I were doing a soft blue or one of the soft greens, it would come through and it would look like a stain or a watermark, or it could look like that. But on this chair, we're actually going to wash away some of the paint. So the fact that the wood underneath is going to come through and show some brown, that doesn't bother me. That's just going to add to the look of the chair. It's not going to be a perfectly smooth, finished, painted chair. The next stage of what we're doing is washing the paint off. So we've got, this is what our chair looks like right now. Looks just like that. We're now going to take a sponge and a cloth and we're going to wash it off. How much we wash off is going to be how limed this chair looks. So once this is all washed off, we're going to have to let the chair sit and dry very, very thoroughly. We can't wax it, and we're going to have been adding water to the wood, so it's definitely going to absorb some. So it'll take a little while to wash it off. Then we're going to let this chair sit, and I'm probably going to have to let it sit overnight. So the next time you join us, we will have finished this chair, and I'll be showing you how I finish it. I'll do some of it, but I'll leave some of it so we can show you. So let's get started with the water. I have a bowl of water here. I'm going to have to keep rinsing my sponge. It's going to fill up with paint. Because this paint is dry but not cured, it's going to come off. And it's going to come off depending on how hard I rub. I'm not using very much pressure here. This is just sort of the weight of my hand Now I want to make sure I get it in the corners, but I'm going to drag this paint off until I get it to a finish that I'm happy with. And as I've never done this look before, I'm going to have to play with it. So my sponge is going to get full of paint pretty quickly. I could probably do this with sanding, but there's something about the water taking there that is nice because I can wipe it back. If I thought I showed a little bit too much wood, I can use the sponge to pull some of that paint back. I have a little bit more control here because the paint will then dry just like it would normally, but it's just going to take a little longer because it has so much water in it. So do I like that big amount of white right there? Turn my sponge over. I think I'm going to end up with a little darker look than what I might have seen in the book too, because I didn't strip this piece completely. I'll rinse this out and do the next piece. So I'm going to go along and I'm going to do this all around the chair. And again, I'm going to have to be careful of drips. And it's a bit of distressing at the same time. And I always say when you're going to distress something, think about where it would naturally wear. On a chair, this is going to have a chair cushion on it. So the cushion's going to come out and probably sit at least level with this profile, maybe a little bit over. So this part's not going to wear. But down here is going to wear because that's maybe where my feet are going to hook a little bit. So I might have a little bit more wear on that rung than I would have at the edges because my feet don't usually hook over here. I would definitely have some wear here. And on this old chair, I left the carpet that they had tacked onto the bottom of it so it didn't scratch the floors. I left that on there. I kind of thought it was funny. It's a little bit raggedy. I might have to replace it. This is a little messy too, so you might want to have a drop cloth underneath just to catch your drips. Probably the biggest thing is going to be to step back from time to time and have a look at it to make sure that I'm actually taking, whoops, I might have taken a little bit too much off. Taking about the same amount of paint off in each place. And I would just keep working my way around side to side. You can see there I took a little bit too much off. Just go back over it with the painty side of the paint-filled side of my sponge. Go down and do the inside. Now this might get wear because the cushion's going to come up probably just below this. So this part is probably going to get a little bit more wear. The inside isn't. You're probably going to have to change your water every so often because it will fill up with paint and you won't be able to rinse your sponge anymore. And do be careful of water spilling down as you're wiping it away because it will create a watermark on the paint underneath. You have to remember this paint is only just dry. It's not cured. So it's got quite a bit of vulnerability to it right now, to water. Now I took quite a bit off here. I find I have to be careful because if I'm pushing too hard, I'm actually taking quite a large hunk of paint off, and I don't want that. I want it just to look as though the paint has stained the grain of the wood. not a Zoe sponge. So one thing I'm finding is if the paint is on a little bit thicker or has dried a little bit more, I'm just dampening the whole thing, rinsing my sponge out and going back up and doing something else. Because when I come back down to the piece that's had a little bit of water resting on it, it seems like I can get a little bit more off the way I want it to. I have a little bit more control. If I've taken too much off, and I don't like that, I'm just going back over it with the sponge and adding a little bit, adding just a little bit of paint to it. So here along the back, I don't like how thick that paint is. Just gonna, but having let the water soak on it a minute, I'm getting it to lift a little bit better. We're almost done here. This is probably going to take longer than painting it did. Just as a little hint on how timing your project might go, because you are going to have to come back. Like this almost looks like old paint rather than limed. So I'm going to just gently scrub away at that. And don't forget, if you ever took too much off, you can always just take your old white paint, go back over it, let it dry, and do it again. So you haven't finished this in any way yet. I'm just going to finish up here. Make sure you do in between your slats, because that's a dead giveaway if you don't get rid of the paint that's there. It's going to look like you painted it. And what we want to make it look like is lime. So let's stand back and have a look at this. This needs just a little bit more right here. There's great grain in the wood right here too, so I'm getting lots of the white paint, old white paint left in the grain as I rub it away the top layer. I think that might be one of the tricky places too, is where the chair slats attach. So just stand back and have a look at it. Obviously a little bit more here. I'm going to drop some paint there, cover that a little bit more. And then I want to get rid of, when I'm doing this, I'm dragging my paint down here because I'm making sure I come straight off the back slat. Well, I don't want to leave that because that's not something, that's not an effect I want to see. Again, that would give away that we've done it with paint. So I'm always going to make sure that I go back over, go with the grain to get rid of those little paint marks. When it's dried and cured, you'll see that. If I'm not, and I'm not talking, this is the grain of the wood that's changed here. I suppose I could make a swoop and it would look like the grain of the wood, but if I do something and I leave it with the lines crisscrossing like that, it's a dead giveaway. So, you're almost finished this. This piece, we're going to set it aside because once it's all been limed, it's going to have to sit and dry thoroughly. And rather than make you wait around while that happens, we're going to do this finish as the beginning of our next show so that you can see just how we apply the wax to our lime chair and make it look like it's an old oak chair that's been sitting maybe even out in the weather for a long time. So I look forward to you joining me on the next show, At Home with Cathy.